Hi there, it's Gina Gardner here, and I'm joined as usual for our genuine chats by Rachel Davidson, my good friend.
Hi there.
Both of us are international #1 bestsellers.
Yeah.
And you can find our books on my website, genuinely-u.com, or on Amazon. More of that later. One of the things that I find quite fascinating is that when I'm working with clients, how often parents come up as a theme.
Yes.
And I find it fascinating that people may be in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s.
Yes.
And still they are referring back to how they were brought up, the way their parents treated them, and a sense that that's held them back in some way or other throughout their lives. And so we were talking earlier, weren't we? And the question came up, how long is it reasonable to blame your parents?
Yeah, because I mean, if you're a fan of the Parkin poem, which I
Yes.
shall not quote verbatim.
It's quite rude, but your parents, they muck you up.
If you are a fan of that, then you can believe that you will forever live with the consequences of what your parents decided to do. This poem is quite clear on that point.
I think it's true that you will always have that as a part of you, but you can choose to use the way in which your parents brought you up if it's not the way you wanted or you felt it should have been, either as something to keep you down or as a spur to do something different.
Yeah, and I think basically, I mean, I have two swords to this because, of course, I am a parent too.
Yes.
So I have moments where I think, oh, that's down to the family structure. That's down to the family culture. That's a little software code that's been implanted in my head, and it always runs that awful silly job and buggy whatever. And then I think, ooh, but I'm a parent. What am I doing wrong? What am I doing? Yeah.
I think we need to establish some principles very early on. Children do not come with a manual.
They definitely don't.
And it's interesting, isn't it, that for pretty well every job in life you get training. You get training before you start and on the job training. Yeah. And yet one of the biggest, I think, most important jobs in life, which is that of being a parent, there is no preparation. Yeah. There is no training. And the other thing that makes it so complicated is you can have 3 or 4 children in a family and they all need you to be fair. Yeah. But they actually need you to treat them in a different way because they're wired differently, because they come at a different time, because their position in the family makes a difference. Yeah. So I think if you're a child listening to this, even if you're a 40, 50, 60-year-old child, you're still the child of your parents. I think it's important to recognise that I believe generally parents are doing the very best they can. I don't think parents go out to be deliberately difficult, to deliberately mess their children's heads up.
Not the vast majority.
No, there may be a small minority who themselves are so dysfunctional.
Yeah, when we start to talk about psychosis and all that, yes.
But even if you have a child who has psychosis, it's not actually your fault necessarily. And I think we've got to separate this business of blame and fault from what goes on. Because why is it that one person in a really dysfunctional situation will rise above it and use that as the fuel to help them be different, and other people it will make them sink into the depths of despair? Yeah. So number one principle is parents don't come with manual, and I think they need to be forgiven for, every child is an experiment in effect, isn't it?
Well, I think the seed of it is that you're a child, and you therefore think that the adults around you have got it sussed, that they know what they're doing. Yes. That is a childlike view of the real world, isn't it?
Particularly when your children are very young. Yeah. When they become teenagers, their belief is quite the opposite. Their parents know nothing.
To challenge, but actually, there's still that sort of bedrock.
Yes, of course there is, and I'm being a bit facetious.
My mum and dad know. My mum and dad know what they're doing. This sort of starting point, and then when you grow up and become a parent, you realise you're just hanging on for dear life half the time.
Yeah.
You think you've got it sorted, and then the child goes and changes again, and suddenly there's like this new chess game, and you're clinging on. And if you're just that little bit ahead of them, then you're winning.
I'm going to say you're doing really well.
But my children probably think, I know what I'm doing.
Yes.
I don't.
No. Maybe they shouldn't listen to this, or maybe they should. So principle number 1, doing the best they can.
Yeah.
Principle number 2 is that when you are a parent, you have a particular blueprint of how a parent should be.
Yeah.
That may be based on how you were parented, or based on the opposite.
Trying to do the opposite, yeah.
Of how you're parented.
Yeah.
Problem is, children, particularly as they grow up, also have a blueprint of how they think they should have been parented.
Yes,
when they match, that's okay.
Yeah.
But actually, they often don't.
Because you often hear about people sort of saying, oh, I wish my mum had been more like my best mate's mum, and all this.
Yeah.
And my husband has some examples of that where he remembers distinctly being exposed to other families.
Yes.
And feeling the absolute difference between
Yes.
how their family structure worked and what was done in their house versus his, and coming back and sort of having that slightly disturbing moment of, oh, I thought the whole world was like this, but actually it's not. There's lots of different ways.
Now, the blueprint principle also works in pretty well every relationship. It's not just about children and parents, parents and children.
Mm-hmm.
But if we have a very strong blueprint that we've either taken off the television or from another friend's family, and it doesn't measure up, that sets up a whole range of negative emotions, which can be that they've rejected me because they don't treat me in the way that I've seen. That means they don't love me. And one of the things that happens is we make meaning of everything. The trouble is, we don't always make the right meaning. And, parents who, if you think about parents who are very critical, that's a very common pattern. And that because their parents were critical, people feel that they are unworthy. They don't develop confidence in themselves.
Yeah.
And I've had a number of conversations with clients who, my parents didn't love me. They were always on at me. They were always critical. When I asked them to think about what was the motive behind that criticism, and they stop and think, often there is a sea change, and they recognise that was their parents' albeit very clumsy way of wanting them to be better, wanting to bring out the best of them, to motivate them. And I've heard a number of parents, particularly when I was a head of principal of a school, who are saying, well, I don't praise him, I don't want him to get big-headed. I want him or her to do better. And they've got the balance out of kilter. In the same way, parents who accept and praise everything their child does, even when it's not their best, even when it's antisocial, they're doing just as much a disservice to their children as they are those who are highly critical.
Yeah, I mean, you go back to that parking poem, and the message is, even when you're trying to correct something that you think was done wrong in the past to you, you are creating problems yourself. And I've got a good example, actually, of a generational family trait within my family, which is that my maternal grandmother, she came to live in the family home. They had a granny annex done, and she, I was about sort of 10, possibly a bit younger when she came here, and she tried to mother me and my twin sister. So Nag did all of the motherly things in the household whilst my mum was still there. My mum was studying at the time, so she was sort of a working mum in that sense. And we really resented it because we didn't need two mothers.
No.
And it was bad enough getting nagged by mum, let alone getting nagged by nanny, for God's sake. And so it would create a lot of tension. And my mum, at the time, had a discussion with her, which basically said, you don't need to be their mother, you just have to be their grandmother. I can be their mother.
Yeah.
Now, my mother has gone on to remember that very clearly, and has set herself a role within her maternal grandmothership of never trying to be the mother role with the grandchildren. But that has meant that instead of trying to be sort of, you know, obviously as a grandmother you have to be occasionally in charge of discipline and bad conversations.
Well, particularly if you're in charge of them, you're not with them all the time.
Yeah.
They come to your house, for example.
Yeah. So she's swung the pendulum, but very sort of, you know, very intuitively, a lot of people would say, because she felt that we were treated unfairly in that scenario where the grandmother was being too overbearing. So she's tried to be completely the opposite. And the difficulty that then creates is, of course, she's not being balanced about it. So
no
then
boundaries.
She's always the good guy.
Yeah.
And then she got to, in that scenario with her and me, she got to play the good guy because she got Nanny off our backs. So Mum was the saviour.
Yes.
In this scenario, I'm never the saviour because I'm always the one having to do the hard line. And Grandma is always the one who's the soft touch, who will say yes, who will never say no, and all this. Now, you know, it's just an example of how, in experiencing something in her life,
she's gone too far.
That she sort of set up this rule of, oh, I must never do that.
Yes.
But she's forgotten the balance. She's forgotten that everything is nuanced. That nothing is as straightforward as that. There are obviously lots of other reasons.
Yes.
I'm painting a very slim picture of a very complex person.
Yes.
But just in that one decision of, oh, I will not behave like my mother did to
yes.
her grandchildren, I will be something different. There are other dynamics created.
Yes.
So, okay, so you could sort of say, well, you know, maybe that was always going to happen. Maybe it's the mix of the grandchildren when the grandmother and the parents, and is it ever solvable in that sense?
I think it's so complex, and I think that's one of the challenges for parents and for children who become adults.
Yeah.
Another common pattern, and this is a personal one, my father never praised us as children.
Yeah.
He would tell other people how proud he was of us.
Yeah.
And we would hear secondhand, but we didn't ever hear it from him.
And that's very common, isn't it?
Very, very common. And particularly for, well, I don't want to generalise, I think it's probably more common for fathers to do that than mothers.
Yes.
Partly because they are not, generally speaking, in the picture on a minute-by-minute basis in quite the same way.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, for me, what was interesting is when my mother became terminally ill, my father and I had a conversation about being open and honest with one another and making sure that in the time we had left with my mum, that we would say everything that we needed to say and that we wanted to say. And I brought up, you know, this issue up that we would hear from other people that, you know, who was pleased with what we'd done or proud of us. And my dad apologised and said, I thought at the time I was doing the right thing, but on hindsight, I recognise that actually praise, when it is actually deserved, is incredibly important. And that, you know, giving children fulsome praise when they have tried their best, when they have got out of their comfort zone, when they have achieved, is important. But we went on to have a discussion about the fact that if you only make it about achievements, then you are setting up a belief within those children that actually you only have worth when you're achieving. And we had a conversation about the difference between being a human being, where, you know, are you kind, are you compassionate, are you thoughtful, must be part of the mix, rather than how have you done in your spelling test and have you achieved this exam, or you know, and so on. And so, you know, I think for me that the next principle I'd like to highlight with people is balance, as you've spoken about, but balance and boundaries, in the sense that having a real sense of, for your children, what you expect of them and why that's important. And when they live up to that expectation or exceed it, lots and lots of praise. Now, when they don't, I think one of the important things is that you criticise the behaviour and not the child. It's not you're stupid or you're rubbish or you're naughty, because then the child starts to want to live up to that reputation.
Yes.
But I love you very much, and I love you too much to let this go.
Yeah.
That behaviour is not what I expect of you.
Yeah.
I expect you to do better than that, because I know you have the potential. It's a very different message comes through from you.
Yes.
Now, the next thing I'd like to talk about is when we become adults and we look back, we only have our Homeric memory.
Yes.
Now, for those of you that may not be familiar with that expression, a Homeric memory means that we remember it from our perspective.
Yeah.
And of course, everybody has a perspective, and your perspective is skewed by your beliefs about the world and about the way you interpret things. And we are interpreting information every second of every day that we're awake, and we're interpreting dreams and things when we're asleep. But because we see it from that perspective, that standpoint, doesn't make it true. So at the moment, we're sitting on the settee in my garden room, looking at the computer. We're getting a perspective which is very specific. If I were to go and stand at the door, looking on into the room, I would have a different perspective.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important that we recognise that, first of all, we are seeing and remembering things, hearing what our parents said, their tone of voice and so on, from our Homeric memory. And so will our parents be doing the same. And the other thing is that we assume motive.
Yes.
Those children of parents who assumed that their parents were being critical because they didn't love them, or that they they treated your brother or sister differently.
That's a classic, isn't it?
Which meant that they were the favourites.
Yeah.
That may be your perspective,
yeah.
But actually from your parents' perspective, it may be that they were doing their best to service individual needs. Of course, there are situations, I mean, my sister and I, my sister was over 10 years older than my brother, and I was 7.5 years older than my brother. We were almost a different generation.
Yeah.
And we were brought up very much more strictly than my brother.
Yes.
And as a child, it always seemed unfair.
Yes.
But what I didn't put in the mix until later was my mother went out to work when I was, how old was I? 11? And my brother was very little. We had my mother at home all the time.
Yeah.
And so part of how she dealt with my brother, I suspect, was guilt because she was going out to work.
So she spoiled him when she did have time with him because she felt guilty about the time she was staying away.
And they were financially better off.
Yes.
And they'd grown themselves in those. They'd mellowed.
Yes. It's often the way, isn't it, that the first child really sort of...
Well, they're the ones who hold the line, don't they? They have to go through every fight, when are you going to be able to wear lipstick or stay out late or whatever.
And it's true also that the children that follow after watch those fights with the first child and think, I think I'll be a bit clever about how I approach that issue.
So this is really very much like a bowl of spaghetti.
Yeah.
And, what I want you to think about if you're watching, listening to this, is what assumptions are you making about your parents? If your parents are alive, it's an ideal opportunity to go and have a conversation with them and say to them, make sure, very neutral voice, very neutral body language. Tell me, as a parent, what were you, not what were you thinking of?
Yeah, how very day, nothing like that.
But actually, I always felt that you were being critical of how I was behaving and how well I was achieving. What was behind that? What was your rationale for that? Your parents may very well say, I don't know. I just was doing the best that I could.
It's how my mum and dad brought me up. These things stretch back
Absolutely.
many, many, many years.
And so we have our family conditioning. And we're being conditioned from the moment we're born. I mean, one of the things I think that many parents don't know, but I think if they did would make a difference, is that they think of babies as not absorbing the conditioning. When babies are born, their brains are like porridge. And their unconscious mind, the first thing that they do is they want to be sure that they are going to survive. So newborn babies have a very specific cry, which is very difficult to ignore. And they will cry, and you'll often see when babies are picked up, they're very, they will shake. What they are doing in all of that is getting to a point where they realise that they can trust the adult to keep them safe. And for some babies, that takes about 2 weeks. Once they've done that, they go into a whole period which lasts for months called attunement. So you smile at your baby smiles back. You make a face, they make a face. And it's a thing that parents generally do naturally. What parents may not realise is all of the time they're doing that, all the time that there is a reaction and an interaction with their children, the neural pathways to the brain are being created. And if you don't have that interaction, those neural pathways are either not created or are not completed. And things like understanding cause and consequence, timelines, truth and fact and fiction, a whole range of things are created by that attunement process. And if it doesn't happen well, then children get what's called attachment disorder. Now, in the UK, they think about 33% of children have attachment disorder, which means that they don't thrive in terms of their social ability, that they don't understand that, you know, every action I have has a consequence. And it means that they struggle in school, and they are much less able to get on well in the world. If you remember back, I mean, many of our listeners may be too young, but in the 80s and 90s, we saw on the news many clips of children in Romanian orphanages, where those children were in cots. There was very little human interaction. And those children became very withdrawn. They didn't speak, they didn't cry, because they knew there was no point. And whilst that's a very extreme example, one of the things that does concern me is the number of children who are in pushchairs facing out, where previously there would be lots of interaction going on between parent and child. That's not happening. And although they can see the world, they're not getting that stimulus in the sense of the language and the interaction that goes with that.
But I have to admit that I'm sitting here and I'm hearing all of this, you know, research and discovery and greater understanding of the human development and the human psychology, and feeling as I did with young babies, so totally responsible for the quality of their life from that moment on, and how if I made a mistake, no matter how well intentioned, or how I would ruin their lives because I wouldn't have developed good psychology. And I think this is what a lot of certainly new parents, you know, really suffer from. I mean, this is why we have so much helicopter parenting going on today, this decade, versus just 20 years back.
But 20 years back, far fewer mums were needing to go back to work. They stayed, and they were mothers and housewives rather than having to try and do that and a career. Which made a huge difference. Life was much less complicated. Mobile phones didn't exist in the same way. The distraction of 24-hour television didn't exist in the same way. We didn't have iPads. We didn't have all of the range of technological distractions that there are now.
That's all true, but I think
I'm not saying that's necessarily all bad.
No,
but it just life was very different.
But I think I think we're disabled in the sense that we're looking back on it with slightly rose-coloured. I think when we're in the moment, I think my mum probably would have described a stressful scenario of a day in the same way that I can describe a stressful scenario
in
of a
some
day.
ways more stressful, in the sense that those kids, they learnt to entertain themselves, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, they're sort of learning to entertain themselves now, but
in a different way.
Mediums and stuff.
Yeah.
I guess my point is that that no matter what, no matter how much you try to sort of make life perfect, it's never going to be perfect.
Every generation,
there's always stresses,
has a different set of stresses,
external issues, and then it comes to the core point of, so how long is it? When you're 15, it's okay to blame your parents for some things, because that's kind of like rebellion. When you're 25 and you're out in the world and you've got a job and you're starting to make decisions for your own life direction, is it still relevant? What about 35? My ex-husband still rants and raves about his mother.
Well, I've got an aunt at 96 who's still ranting and raving about her parents.
So now we're starting to get into the realms of, oh my God, when are you going to just accept that your parents were just people?
Yeah.
And you're a parent yourself and you've made mistakes. When are you going to let them off the hook for the mistakes they made?
I think the sooner you do it, the better.
Yeah.
When you do that, and I think for me it brings up the whole theme of forgiveness.
Yeah.
And for me, forgiveness, you don't condone, you don't forget,
yeah.
but you let go of the string which keeps you looking back.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest issue for people who don't let go of the blame culture to their parents, they've got one foot very firmly in the past.
Yes.
Well, they can't enjoy the present and the future freely because they're holding on to that and resentment, that hurt.
I would describe that kind of mindset as being very childish, that they literally haven't done the growing up that they need to do.
Well, they're not taking responsibility, are they?
No.
Everybody else's fault, not mine.
No, because you've got to grow up. You've got to accept that the world is not perfect. You've got to accept that mistakes happen for all the best and worst reasons.
And that's part of our growth.
Yeah. Unfortunately, life.
You don't grow when there isn't a challenge. You stay the same. And I think it's really important that we recognise that those opportunities our parents give us that we feel may be negative are great opportunities to grow.
Yeah.
And that by not letting go, that we are giving ourselves a life sentence, and a life sentence of looking back, of regret, of potential depression and anxiety, because that happened when we were growing up. And it is time to let it go.
I mean, I know that having broken up the family from an unhappy marriage, that I suffer a lot of guilt.
Yeah.
Not all the time. I don't want to paint the picture that I'm sort of walking around with like a big heavy weight on my shoulders, but there are occasional times, and it's usually actually when I get reminded by Facebook of things that happened pre-divorce, and I think, oh, because the children are often smiling in pictures, aren't they?
Yes. Well, they were young.
And they were younger.
Yes.
And you never take pictures of grumpy people and post them on social media, so your life always looks like
rosy,
happy. And there are guilt pangs, and I think, am I going to really? Are the children going to basically grow up and sort of say, well, yeah, you ruined our life at that point, Mum?
I'd like to put a counterpoint with you, in that you were in a loveless marriage where it was unhappy, where the two of you were existing rather than living.
Yeah.
And what you have given your children the opportunity to understand is that you deserve better.
Yeah.
And that in staying in a loveless marriage where there's a lot of put downs, there's a lot of acrimony, actually is not the right thing to do for anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to give it your best shot, but how many years were you married at first time?
I've forgotten, Gina. it was 15.
So, and how many of those years were unhappy?
10 at least.
So you didn't just, life's a bit tricky and throw it away.
No.
For a decade, you tried to make it work.
Yeah.
And it didn't. And I would just add a counter view that staying in that sort of toxic environment is giving your children a lesson
Yeah.
that actually is probably more damaging than, so long as you do it and you do it in the right way.
Yeah.
That if you've given it your best shot and it's still not working, and all of you are unhappy because of it, then you need to do something different.
And I totally do that sort of
the rest of the time.
But there's a galloping horse that is like out of my control.
Yeah.
And that galloping horse is what's in the heads, the stories, the perceptions, the perspectives that are in the heads of my son and my daughter.
Yes.
And of course, I'm not in control of those.
No.
And if they come to me and talk to me about the scenario, now or in the future, I will be able to give them a perspective.
Yes.
And hopefully at that point they will also have a bit of life experience and a bit of an understanding as to how relationships are not easy. But nevertheless, in the moment, if I have to sort of say that when I'm feeling guilty about that decision, what comes next is the concern that the stories and perceptions in their heads will never match up to the reality of what I was living and the reality that they were living, from my perspective. And that's the nub of it, isn't it?
But that's called life.
Because I have to trust they will grow up and become balanced people.
You do the best you can, and we keep coming full cycle, you do the best you can.
Yeah.
Now, one of the principles that a number of people subscribe to is that we come onto this earth to a soul to have a human existence.
Yes.
And that we choose our parents.
Yes.
Now, I was having a conversation with somebody the other day about this principle, and for some people they would think that's absolute rubbish, other people believe it wholeheartedly. I'll leave it to our listeners to decide which way round. But the person I was talking to said she had struggled with how she'd been brought up, been very abusive childhood as it happened.
Yeah.
And one of the things that had helped her was to actually take on board that she had chosen that lifetime to teach herself to be resilient and to take responsibility for her own quality of life, but also for her parents who had chosen, it was a joint choice, for her parents to learn something about themselves.
Yeah.
And I think it's an interesting one that, if we choose the life, choose our parents, then, we have perhaps a greater sense of control over what's going on.
Yes.
But the question is not, were my parents unkind to me, were my parents good parents, but what can I learn from this life?
Yeah, what did I set out? What was my intention? What must have been a purpose? So I want, what was that? And to seek that rather than to, moan and blame for.
And even if it's not your belief that you chose your parents, I think the principle of, okay, it wasn't as I wanted it to be. My blueprint wasn't matched.
Yeah.
But what constructively, positively can I take out of this?
Yes.
What have I learned?
Yes.
And one of the things, I work quite a lot with people who have been abused as children. And one of the things that comes across to me and to them when they think about it in this way, what strength they have, what resilience that they've learned, that they have been just like steel, tempered by fire. Now, please don't get the idea that I'm condoning abuse. I'm not at all. But once people recognise that they are incredibly strong, then they find it easier to start letting go of the pain, the hurt, and all of the other things.
Yes.
So I think what I'd like to leave our listeners and watchers with is we have the opportunity as adults to write the life story that we have to a large extent.
Yeah.
So if you're going to be the author of your own script, make yourself the victor, make yourself the hero, not the victim.
Yeah.
All the time you're blaming somebody else, you can't take responsibility for you.
That's the point. That it's that word in the title of this discussion. It's okay to know your parents. It's okay to be aware of their misgivings and their strengths. when it gets a little bit weird is when you're a 45-year-old adult blaming them.
Yeah.
Still, that's when it's
it's counterproductive. And even if their parents were awful, at some point, if you want to enjoy a great quality now and a potentially great future, you have to draw a line in the sand and say, I'm not going to carry that great trunk of regret and blame, because it is like carrying a very, very heavy piece of luggage around with you. And it just destroys any opportunity you have to be truly happy, successful and fulfilled.
Agreed.
And so if you have had a difficult childhood, if you're struggling to let go, please get some help. Because the quality of your life, and indeed if you have children, the quality of their lives will be better as a result. Now there's lots and lots of information on the website, which is genuinely, then the little line, the hyphen, uyou.com. That's genuinely-u.com. And you can find all sorts of things on there. There's the free TV series. You can sign up for that. You can get a free digital download of the book. You can find out about one-on-one coaching or the Thrive Tribe membership group. So genuinely-u.com. You'll find our books, The Point of Me by Rachel, and all of my books, but particularly the latest book, Thriving Not Surviving, The 5 Secret Pathways, Happiness, Success and Fulfillment. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week at the same time. So thanks very much. By the way, if you've enjoyed this, please share it. If you're listening to the recording rather than the live, please can you put something in the comment box to let us know you're there. Thanks ever so much. Take care. Bye-bye now.